now.
I have the perfect face for radio. I don't know about voice.
Well, I'm glad you got the children settled so that they are not going to go hungry tomorrow.
Yeah, well, I whipped out my best recipe, peanut butter and jelly. So,
Well, I think peanut butter and jelly is good. I like it. Now, I'm curious, do you put peanut butter on each slice and then the jelly in the middle, or do you just put jelly on one side and peanut butter on the other?
how would you put it in the
Well,
middle?
oh, okay. Okay, here's a sandwich, okay. And here
Uh-huh.
I put peanut butter and I put peanut butter and then I put jelly on.
You
So
spread the
that
jelly
the
directly on the peanut butter?
Yeah, so that the jelly doesn't soften the bread.
Oh, that's an interesting idea. I don't know. I'd feel weird because I often have to take the knife back into the jelly jar a few times, and so if it's got peanut butter on it, I'd get things all mixed up.
Well,
I don't know if I could have the skill to pull that off.
I think you have more than one knife, right? So you
I'm
have a
not gonna
knife
use
in
more
the.
than one knife on my kids. You underestimate the powers of my cheapskate.
Anyway, I know some people that's why I do it. I put peanut butter on both sides and then the jelly on. But
Interesting.
other
Now,
people do it the other way.
we have had jelly that comes in that squeezable thing. You don't even have to have a knife for that part. That sounds like an
Oh
interesting idea,
yes.
though. The peanut butter on both sides, squeeze it on
Yeah.
top, no
Yeah.
contact.
All right. Well, I know it's late for you. We'll get started.
Sure,
And
no
like I said,
worries.
we're just going to talk about you, and then gradually we'll start talking about the scriptures
Okay, sounds good. Let me shut my
and
office door
how.
real quick.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Well, we'll have a moment of silence. Now I got to make sure this is recording and audio hijack is recording, so we're good to go. I hate when I do something and then forget to push the record button.
Been
Can't tell you
there.
can't tell you how many times I've had to go. Can we start over? All right. So we'll have a moment of silence. We'll begin. Well, Matthew, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing this evening?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on.
We're starting a little late because you had a very important job this evening. What was
Yeah,
that?
got to make some peanut butter jelly sandwiches for my kids.
Now, do the children prefer you making the sandwiches or your wife?
Oh no, definitely my wife. She spreads the peanut butter all the way out to the edges and got the jelly nice and evenly distributed. I put extra effort into it, so I closely approximated my wife's technique.
Okay, well, I would rather have your wife's sandwiches because you don't want some bread that doesn't have peanut butter on it.
That's what she says too. Yep,
Yeah.
that's my number one complaint from my kids. I figure I'm an okay dad if that is my number one complaint, though.
Well, if I ever come to the southern part of the United States, what state are you in exactly?
I'm here in Tennessee.
Tennessee. Are you near Nashville?
Yeah, just about 20 minutes south of it.
Oh, okay. Because we have a daughter. She married a fine young man just outside of Nashville. I can't remember the name of the city, but then they moved here to Utah, but they go back to Tennessee quite a bit.
Oh, it's a great
And
place to
so,
visit.
yeah, I've only been to Nashville once. But anyway, if I do come and visit you, I'm going to make sure that your wife makes the peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and not you.
If you come and visit, we're going out, my friend.
Oh, all right. Well, well, then who's paying for
We'll see about that.
it? Well, t tell me about yourself. Did you grow up in Tennessee?
No, so I was born and raised in Arizona in the Mesa area. I was a military brat. My dad moved us all over the country and then did a 2 year stint out in South Korea. Eventually, we settled in North Carolina about the time I entered high school. And I met my wife there, served my mission, got back, and several years after that, moved out to Tennessee, and we've been here ever since.
Well, it's beautiful. Tennessee is beautiful. I've enjoyed it when I'm there.
We do love
Now,
it.
you said you served a mission. Where did you serve?
Colorado.
Colorado. Where in Colorado?
So it was the Denver South mission, which I describe as taking the northwestern third of the state and the south half of Denver. I
Oh,
was just
okay.
checking a few days ago, and the boundaries have since changed. but that is the way it was when I was there at least.
Have the boundaries gotten smaller?
Yeah, they've split into several missions out in Colorado. So it's not
Oh,
just the
okay.
three that were there when I was.
Well, that's because when you were there, you baptized so many that they finally had to
That
shrink
is
the
absolutely
boundaries.
not what happened.
Well, I assume, like you're most people, you've really enjoyed your mission.
Oh, it was wonderful. Best 2 years for my life. Yes.
Yes, yeah, it's great, great. I didn't go. I didn't join the church until I was married, and I'm not so old that I was a pioneer where they sent the married men out into the world. So,
You didn't get called
uh,
from General Conference?
yeah, yeah, in fact, that's the reason I wouldn't go to General Conference because I was afraid they might call me. Isn't that amazing how the things worked then? The faith that they had, and General Conference would come and you'd hear your name, and the next day you're getting a wagon together and leaving your family in starvation.
We were talking about that at church this past Sunday because sometimes as saints, we like to overestimate how much we'd be willing to give. We like to think if the prophet were to say, drop everything and trek it out to Missouri, that we'd stand up and go in a heartbeat. But this week, we did not have heater working in our chapel. And so it was a balmy 45 degrees during sacrament meeting, and we started getting a little testy sometimes. I thought, maybe we're not quite at that level of Zion that we're willing to sacrifice all things yet, if this is pushing us a little bit to our boundaries.
Yeah, do we really want to give up our air-conditioned, heated homes and live maybe in a tent and cook on a little over a little fire with one pot and not have any peanut butter and jelly sandwiches?
Oh, no, I can't do that. No.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't care what we have to give up. I will give up everything but chocolate. So that's, if they say we
You
got to move to
know,
Missouri, my question is, will there be chocolate there?
so you never say what that one thing the boundary is because once the Lord hears you say
Uh-oh,
something,
uh-oh.
he'll put it to the test. Was it
Yeah, he'll
Joseph
put
Smith
the
said,
test.
if you want the blessings of Abraham, you will be tried as Abraham?
Yeah, that's the reason I don't ask for those blessings. Yeah, I'll have to repent. I don't care if I ever have chocolate. So hopefully that will make things better. Well, now what is it you do for a living?
So I'm currently a software engineer for Family Search.
And exactly what are you doing within Family Search?
Uh, Working on a niche team you wouldn't recognize or be it's every job I go to, every company I work for, it's really hard to explain. But basically, when you're using Family Search and you get hints saying, "Hey, your ancestor has a census record," or "Hey, we may have discovered that there's this uncle that you didn't know about," I work on the hinting system that powers those suggestions that arrive in your mailbox. So
Wow.
that's kind of the best way I can explain it.
Wow. Well, I admire anyone that can code. Um, I did some coding in BASIC. I assume you know what BASIC is, right?
I do,
That was
yes.
a long time ago.
There's
Anyway,
much sympathy in my voice right now. Yes.
I actually wrote a tithing program for my ward back in the 80s using BASIC. And I was one of about three wards in California that were experimenting with it. But anyway, we in our ward we had something where at least it kept track of the tithing and everything. And so that was my venture into coding, and I decided I don't think I'm made for this.
I'm not made for it either, yet here I am.
It, it takes a special mind. It really does. Now,
They often say when you're a software developer, it's fun debugging because you're the detective solving a murder mystery, but you're also the murderer. So you get to
now I've
figure
never
out
heard
what you
that
did.
before. So how many years you been doing this?
I've been working in the software industry since 2011, so just a few months after I got back from a mission.
Oh, wow. Now, did you go to school for it or did you just pick it up?
I did. I did schooling and work full time, both. So that was an exciting 8 years of my life.
Where did you go to school?
North Carolina State University.
Okay. And it took 8 years to get through that.
Yes, well, I made some mistakes. I started out at a community college, which was a good decision financially. What I did not do is work up the guts to talk with the guidance counselors about the classes I'd taken in high school and see if I can fast forward past a lot of the prerequisites. And that reticence added a good year and a half to my education. And
Oh,
so
wow.
balancing serving in a Spanish branch on top of being a newlywed, on top of school, on top of a full-time job, and then added a kid to the mix during that part was, like I said, a really interesting 8 years.
Wow. So you served in a Spanish branch.
Yes, so I've been in two Spanish branches since we've been married. So we did 5 years in a Spanish branch in North Carolina and got called to another Spanish branch last year here in Tennessee when they just formed one up.
So you speak Spanish.
Oh, I do, yes.
Okay. Well, where did you learn Spanish?
So I took 4 years of Spanish, well, 5 years of Spanish in high school. 5 years in a 4 year time frame is a little interesting, but we had semester long classes. So I went up through AP Spanish and then studied the Book of Mormon in the year leading up to my mission so that I could be all prepared to be called to my English speaking mission. And the last area of my mission president called me to a bilingual area. Now, I found out that they could do that partway through my mission because we went to the mission office when I was a brand new missionary, and I noticed that my card was yellow on the transfer board. And there were only about two or three yellow missionaries on the transfer board. And I said, President, what is this yellow card? And with a completely serious look, he said, those are my problem elders. Oh, great. I'm in trouble already. And he chuckled like you are now and kindly said, no, these are my bilingual elders. I can put them in whatever area. I would hope to go Spanish some point in my mission, and I got it on my last area. And
Oh, wow.
the High Council, when they had me report, they asked me to share my testimony in Spanish and decided it was good enough to put me in a Spanish branch. So
No.
we ended up there just a few months after I got married.
It's interesting working in branches. I worked in American Sign Language branches for a little over 20 years. And
Wow.
so I know what it's like to be in a branch. It's a totally different atmosphere than a ward.
Hmm.
Now, in your branch right now, do you have enough priesthood?
There's never enough priesthood. It's it's really unique, this branch compared to the last branch I served in. In the last branch, they relied heavily on bringing in people from the surrounding wards to fill leadership positions.
Yeah.
In this branch, they've taken a little bit of a different approach in this stake, and they filled the leadership positions with native speakers, native-born people, and only called a very, very few people in to fill positions, and fortunately not put us into big leadership positions. They want the branch to be a little more self-sustaining. So what that
Yes.
means is right now, we have a first counselor. We do not have a second counselor. We went almost a year without an elders quorum president. Uh, so there's been some major holes, but we make it work. The new versions of the handbook in the church are very accommodating for unique circumstances all across the world, and it's been really beneficial for us to have a lot more leeway than we've had in previous years to adjust things in a way that really helps the members. And boy, serving in a Spanish branch, any high counselor who ever comes and speaks will tell you there is a different spirit in the chapel.
Yes.
You're gonna see maybe people wearing t-shirts. You're gonna maybe see stuff you don't normally see in a Latter-day Saint service, but you're also going to feel the close-knit unity and the familial aspect of a church unit much more powerfully than you will in many English-speaking congregations. People come up and give you hugs and abrazos y besos, and there's always something to eat afterwards. It's a
Yes.
different experience in a wonderful way.
Yes, it is. Now, how big is that branch? I mean, as far as miles, if you had to go from one end of that branch to the other, how far of a drive is that?
Generally, a Spanish branch is going to cover the entire boundaries of whatever stake it resides in. And it's going to be
Okay.
usually attached at the hip to one of the English wards. It's kind of like a host ward, and they'll combine the youth program and the primary program. So we're combined with the ward that covers the temple, and our boundaries do cover the whole stake, which is uh, we get a significant ways up to about two-thirds of the way up into Tennessee, and then we go all the way down to the southern border, if I'm not mistaken. But virtually all of our members live in the Franklin area, which is with basically a 10-minute circle around the temple. And then we have a
Okay.
few families that are in some of the more outlying towns. but not that many.
Yeah, the deaf branch covered several states. In fact, um, for me to, at that time it was home teaching, but to do home teaching, it was an hour and a half for me to get to a family. And or anyway, I served in the branch presidency and all sorts of other callings. That's where I taught for oh my goodness, 13 years in primary. So yeah, I agree about the familial you talked about. There's something about a small group that they have to really
Band together.
band together, knit together, and so it just like it's one big family, really. It really is.
Mhm.
So I enjoyed my time there. I have a deaf grandson, and so I would take him to church and serve. So it's a unique situation, very unique. Now, your wife, does she speak Spanish?
Not a lick, no. So this is
Okay.
we're going on year 7 of her attending a unit where she does not speak the primary language. She knows enough to know when I'm talking about her. There was
Okay.
a time she wanted to bear her testimony. She got up and she had me translate for her, and she got to the part where she was expressing gratitude. And when she expressed gratitude for me, I added some self-complimentary words for fun. And the branch members start laughing, and she turned to me with daggers in her eyes and says, "I did not tell a joke. Why are they laughing?" She's not let me translate her talks ever since then, but
Well, I was at one time a nationally certified interpreter for American Sign Language. Had to get
oh
up because
wow.
my hearing was going bad. But there is a classic story about interpreting. And by the way, there's a difference. This is just for the audience. There's a difference between translation and interpreting. Translation
Oh
is from
yeah.
frozen text, so that means you're taking a book or a movie or something and translating. But interpreting means you're doing it live. And so, anyway,
Interpreting
as
is
the story,
terrifying. Yes.
yes. And what people don't realize is that you say something in English, there's about 4 or 5 different ways you can interpret that. And so you have to kind of it's a interesting process. I used to go to workshops about how the mind works when it's interpreting and how it moves from this section to that section. It's fascinating. Anyway, the story goes that there was a man out in the woods, and he saw some people by a tree out in his yard, about 3 or 4 men, and they were digging up, and he didn't want to go out because he was very afraid. And so he saw, but they had like a big box and they buried it in the ground. Now this
Did it
man
have
was
gold plates
deaf.
in it?
Well, no, supposedly he thought it was maybe some money or something. So anyway, it was buried, and he's deaf, and so he went out afterwards and dug it up and opened it up, and it was just these gold coins. And he go, "Oh man, I am rich." And so he brought it into the house and he hid it. Well, about a week later, he gets a knock on the door, and it's those 3 guys. And they say, "We buried something and we know you've got it." And he says, "Well," he says, "I'm deaf." And they said, "Okay, hang on." So they got on the phone and they called an interpreter. And so the interpreter came out, and the conversation goes now, and this is the interpreter interpreting. And so the bad guy says, "He's got our money. We want our money, or we're going to hurt him." And so the interpreter said, "If you don't give him the money, you're in trouble." Well, this kept going on, and finally the bad guy said, "Okay," pulled out a gun and said, "You either tell us where the money is, or I'm going to shoot you." And the interpreter said, "Oh," and so the deaf guy, of course, in American Sign Language, says, "Okay, it's buried under my bed." The interpreter said, "Go ahead and shoot. I don't care." Now, anybody that missed that is listening to this. The interpreter, once he knew where the gold was, he wanted to get rid of everybody. So
Yep.
anyway, it's a classic story about interpreting. Well, I I asked about your wife because my wife, um, she knows some American Sign Language. She went to school a little bit to try to learn it because she's got a deaf grandson. And So she understood more than she could speak. But anyway, after so many years of doing it, I finally said, I think it's time for us to move on. And in fact, when we moved up here to Utah, we served in a deaf branch. And then I finally one day said, I think maybe it's time for you to enjoy church service in English. But she was always very patient and she'd miss some things, but sometimes she understood a lot more than, and that's usually the case. It's harder to speak it than it is to comprehend it. Would you agree?
Yes, yeah. I mean, if you ever, we're talking about AI a lot more nowadays, right? You'll notice AI is a lot better at recognizing things and understanding things than it is about creating things. Same
Yes.
thing with the human mind. Your kids will understand
Yeah.
what you're saying long before they're able to
Yeah.
communicate back to you. What you said about your wife, here in the Spanish branch, that's one of the blessings is our home ward is the English ward to which the Spanish branch is attached. And again, like I said,
Ah.
the second hour services are combined. So my wife can still go to her gospel doctrine
Ah.
class in English and go to
Okay.
Relief Society and see all of her friends there. So it is kind of a
Okay.
best of both worlds scenario.
Yeah, it is because Amy would sit in Relief Society and she's got a wonderful smile and
And she can give
someone
thumbs
was
up.
going.
Yeah.
So, but she was very patient and very kind and loving in that way. Now, your children, are they picking up Spanish?
They're picking up a little bit here and there. It's not a consistent effort. If you want to learn a language, you really have to immerse yourself in it.
Yes, you do.
And all they have right now is sacrament meeting in
Yeah,
Spanish once a week, and that's not really enough for them to pick up very much.
yeah. And I assume they go to primary in English.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. No, you have to immerse yourself in it, but children can pick up a second language and the third and fourth language very easy. It's
Yes.
amazing. I lived in Israel for 4 years, and my wife was absolutely brilliant with languages. And they thought she was born and raised in Israel speaking Hebrew. But our daughter,
Wow.
who was attending kindergarten, within 6 months, she was fluent in the language.
Wow.
It's just amazing. And I noticed other children, if they're exposed to it, immersed in it,
Mhm.
they pick up the language on. It's just amazing how fast they can actually pick that language up.
Yeah, but it is the
Well,
immersion that's key. When I lived in South Korea for 2 years, I didn't pick up more than a few phrases because I went to Seoul American Elementary School where they spoke
yeah,
English all the time, and I was
yeah,
English at home. So, despite living in the country, being surrounded by the culture and the language and the signs and everything, I couldn't speak it.
yeah, yeah. It makes a big difference. Now, since you are an Army brat or Air Force brat, were you?
Army.
Army. Since you're an Army brat, how many countries have you been in?
Just South Korea, actually.
Oh, okay.
Well, my wife and I took a vacation to Costa Rica a few years ago, but I don't think that quite
Oh,
counts.
okay. Well, it's a nice vacation. So,
Mhm.
well, now I want to get into, first of all, I got to back up a little bit. People need to know you and I have had several conversations because we uh, we also work on the conference weekend podcast. And occasionally I'm a host in there, and you're a host quite a bit on there. But anyway, I've come to know you, and I said I've got to have you on my podcast because you felt you were kind of born at the wrong time.
That's what my wife says.
Yeah, you probably should have been born, what, maybe in the 50s?
That is exactly what she says. She says, "Yeah, you should be taking Social Security disbursements right now and yelling at kids to get off your lawn because your attitude is just like that.
And what kind of attitude is that?
A curmudgeon conservative old whippersnapper."
Well, considering that is your attitude, how do you study the scriptures?
So I actually do study the scriptures on a tablet, and here is why. I took my valued set of paperback scriptures that I got when I was baptized at 8 years old on my mission. And they took a beating, and I covered them in white cardboard and passed along cards as missionaries are wont to do. And I marked those babies up. And those scriptures lasted me for 15 years or something. But shortly after I got married, they mysteriously disappeared. And I tried to explain, I was like, where are my mission scriptures? Where are my baptismal mission scriptures with all of my notes and all of my footnotes and all of my links and all of my underlines and highlights according to the Preach My Gospel lessons? She says, what do they look like? And I describe them. She says, sounds like they look like trash and I might have thrown them away. Oh, great. Now my scriptures are gone. And then I started using the Gospel Library app and I said, wait a minute, I can now link to conference talks and I can cross-link between all these things in the church manual. And I have infinite margin space, infinite highlight colors, and all of my notes and everything are synchronized to the cloud, so I cannot lose them. This is wonderful.
Well, it is a wonderful app. Of course, that's what my mission's on. I don't have my badge on here. I just came back from the temple and my badge is on my coat. But anyway, the Gospel Library is a tremendous app. I know there's some other apps out there, but it's the brethren that are asking us to use the Gospel Library. I know that because it's one of the directives I was given. And just a little tip now, there are 10 colors you can use, but if you ever run out of colors, you can lay one color over another.
Yes, you can. And there's three different highlighting styles too, I've noticed.
Yes, yes, there is. Now, do you use Android, Apple? What are you using?
I'm Android.
Android, okay. And so you use a tablet. You're using an Android tablet.
Hmm.
Okay. Um, so the problem, you've got to be careful if you overlay colors because if you want to somehow delete that, I've had people call me up and say, I've deleted it and it's still there. And I go, well, how many colors are you viewing?
Which one did you
Sometimes
delete?
people will put red on top of red on top of red on top of red. And so they don't realize that they're going to have to do 4 times deletion before they can to do that.
Well, and the
Well, it
other problem
sounds
is
like
anytime you have overlapping annotations, it's hard to, okay, well, I want to modify the note for this one, but not the highlight for that. It's hard to figure out to be able to select a specific one. The other problem is
yes,
if there's a footnote inside your highlight, you try and press on that, you're often going to get it wrong and think you're selecting the highlight, not the footnote. I'm sorry,
yes.
is this the Gospel Library Bug Report podcast or
Well, I'm aware of all the problems with it, and there are some things I would like them to change. They don't listen. Well, it's not that they don't listen. I've actually come to the understanding I'm a power user of the Gospel Library. And some of my friends, there are 3 of us that are serving this mission, and the 3 of us are power users. And there are some at the church headquarters, which I serve out of, that are power users. And I've got some people that I've interviewed that are power users, but we're in a minority. The
yes.
vast majority of the people who use the Gospel Library use it because they don't want to take the quad to church on Sunday. And we know this because we have the analytics. And I
Hmm.
have access to those analytics. And I I love it. Let's just picture a graph of usage of the gospel library, just in general. And so here it is on Monday. Let's say that this is the baseline. And so it's like this until Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday,
Complete flat
Thursday,
line.
Friday. Yeah, just about. It's not quite, but almost. And then Friday it starts going up. And then Saturday it jumps up even more. And Sunday it jumps way up. And then on Monday, it's almost down to the baseline.
So in other words,
And
it's the same graph that we see at Family Search.
oh, really? Is that
Hmm.
true? Wow.
Yes.
Okay.
Everyone does their family history work on Sunday. And to what you said about power users, there is a tiny, tiny sliver of our user base that actually spends decent, reasonable amount of time on the site using it, stitching everything together. Those are our power users. Everyone else logs in once or twice a year, if that.
Wow. Wow. I I see people don't realize, and I've had people because I give devotionals throughout the country on this, and they go, "Do they know what I'm doing?" I don't know. What they know is that somebody has an Android or an Apple phone that is lives in the Franklin area of Tennessee, and I don't, and they know that what they're doing, and they know that they've been on for 3 seconds or 5 seconds or whatever it is. So anyway, the things that I want in the Gospel Library
Yeah,
and
they don't
others
know that
want.
Bill Smith is reading up on the divorce topic and the So I will say
Well,
they do know a little bit more than you're letting on. I found this out just a few weeks ago.
Yes.
because someone had posted saying, "Oh man, one of the best kept secrets, one of the greatest treasures is the General Conference leadership seminar notes that occur prior to every General Conference." And I thought, best kept secrets, it's in the Gospel Library app. I mean, I've always heard, if you want to hide something from the saints, put it in the Gospel Library app.
Yeah.
But I shared the link to the October 2024 General Conference Leadership Center. I said, here's the notes right here that you're talking about. And everyone's like, I don't see it. I don't see it. I click on the site. I don't see it, the URL. I said, well, it's right here. Just go in your Android app, click this, click this, click this. And someone with a little bit more know-how said, Brother Watkins, that is only for people that are in bishoprics. Oh,
Oh.
so it knows who you are. It knows what level of
Yes.
stuff you have access to,
Yes.
and there is conditional
Yes,
displaying
there
of certain
is.
contact. I did not know
Yes.
that.
Yeah. No, that's very true. If you're the bishop and his counselors and things like that, there's certain access that you have that us regulars just don't have. So anyway, the things that I want in the gospel library, I keep asking for, but it's dawned on me, Richard, we know you want it. It makes sense, but you're a power user and most people aren't, and they won't use it. And so I've just had to make modifications. I've really actually, for example, um, when I was called to this calling, the first thing that came out of their mouth, this was on a phone call. I think I got a text. I got a text from church headquarters and said, "Can we talk?" And so I said yes, and we got on the phone. They said, "We'd like to call you as a missionary as an indefinite mission." That was the first thing they said. And I go, indefinite. Isn't that reserved for like the apostles? And they said, well, okay. Can you serve until we get tired of you or you get tired of us? And I said, well, I can handle that. And then secondly, they said, and I know my listeners have heard this before, I'm sorry. But the second thing they said was, no, I asked them, I said, what do you want me to do? And they said, we don't know, but you'll figure it out. Will you accept the call? Uh, yeah, I guess I can handle this. And I knew it was about the gospel library. And so anyway, after about a week, I called them back up and I said, okay, I'm struggling and I know there's a directive. I know there's a directive. What is it? So they reluctantly shared it with me. And it was two things. The brethren want you to use the gospel library and they want you to record your personal revelations in the gospel library. And so I've been doing that. But the problem is recording, if I, the latest one is always at the bottom. There's never a way to sort it so that your latest one is at the top.
So where do you
Because
keep
if
these notes? Do you keep them as a study notebook, or you keep these like as annotations somewhere?
I create a notebook and I call them my small plates.
That's a good name.
And so, but so finally, what I had to do, because quite often I want to go back to something that was revealed to me last week, and I have a lot written. So I got to take my thumb and go like this, like crazy, to get down to the bottom. And I said, this is ridiculous. We should be able to put last first and first last. We should be able to do a quick search, which we can't do. And so I went and moved them over to the day one journal, which I've been using for years and years. And again, my small plates used to be in the journal. And then when I understood what the brethren want, I moved them all over to the notebook in the gospel library, and they're still there. But then when I got so frustrated, I went back to the day one journal. In my day one journal, I have large plates and I have small plates. And so anyway, that's what I do. But that's just an example. I wish there could be some changes on that. So okay, well, you use a tablet. How do you use a tablet?
So I just got a cheap Lenovo tablet. I tried doing it from my phone. I'll do it from my phone in a pinch, but I like being able to have the nice big screen and be somewhat of a book feel. Um, and also my tablet is less chatty with notifications. I think the number one thing I've seen from people who try to study on their phones is they get lost in between their home screen and the Gospel Library app when it's time for
Yeah,
scriptures.
yeah,
When it's time to study, it's okay, let me start navigating and open the home drawer, get to this. Oh, I got a notification from so-so. Let me respond to that real quick.
yeah.
Oh, I got a message from so-so. In fact, I'm trying to remember who it was. It was a 70. And a few years ago in his general conference talk, you'll have to look it up and link it in the show notes because I can't remember exactly what it was. We can find it. He talked about going through that exact thing. He woke up in the morning and was about to have his hour of study, and they got a message and said, "I'll just reply to this real quick." And an hour later, his alarm went off and he had done zero studying. And he talked about how that impacted him throughout the rest of the day.
Yes. Now, I also have an Android because when I give devotionals, I have to have an Android and an Apple. And so my Android's sitting over there. I only use it for devotionals, but there is a way, both on Android and definitely on Apple. It's called focus modes. And you
Yep.
can
Or do
turn on
not
the focus
disturb.
modes. Yeah, it's just like a do not disturb. And you can immediately switch so that you just don't get messages from anyone. I used to use that, but I've discovered I've got pretty good self-control. I may see something come. Now, if it's something from my wife, yes, I will immediately respond. Otherwise, if it's from anybody else, then I let it go because it's there. I can get to it when I need to get to it. But you're absolutely right. It's so easy to get off the subject.
So Elder Tad R. Callister shared something really important about that. So as he was working as a young lawyer in the same office as his father, he was surprised that every morning they would start their day, their busy day, with scripture study. And he would feel the weight and the pressure of all of the phone calls that needed to be returned, all the paperwork that needed to be done. There's too much to get done in a day. And here we are spending time with our scriptures. And he said, it's really interesting when you do your personal scripture study first, everything else manages to get done somehow in the rest of the day, even though he didn't think it was possible. And he shared a great analogy about two men who were having a wood cutting competition.
Mm.
So they would, go through and cut stuff with their axe. And the weaker of the men would disappear into the woods every hour for about 15 minutes, and no one knew what he was doing. Like, was he taking a rest? What's going on with him? And they were surprised at the end of the competition that this weaker man had won. And the older man was just flabbergasted. He says, how could you have won? I was busting through the entire 8 hour shift here. You were off taking breaks in the woods every hour. And how did you manage to get more done than me? And he said, well, for those 15 minutes, I was sharpening my axe.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
Elder Callister said, brethren, when you work, make sure you carve out time to sharpen your axe. You will be more effective in providing for your families, in serving in your church callings, in doing any of these righteous desires, including your professional employment, if you take time to sharpen your axe. Your
Yes.
ability to receive revelation, get in tune with the Spirit, you'll be far more effective. Don't think of it as you're wasting time. Don't think of it as, well, I'm doing this church thing here so I can get to the rest of my life.
Absolutely. In fact, there's an addition to that story. I had Ted Callister on my podcast,
Oh,
and
wonderful.
what they most people don't know is Dad around 5 o'clock would be going through the office, says, "Time to close up. We got to spend time with our families." So it wasn't like he was allowed to work till 8 or 9 o'clock at night like a lot of attorneys do. It was basically 8 to 5 job. And the dad would have the scriptures in the morning, and then around 5 o'clock, he'd be saying, "Close up." And so, yes, that is a great story. And we need to study the scriptures. And almost all the advice we see on studying the scriptures is do it in the morning. Now, some people might have a schedule where it's got to be at night or something, but yeah, the best thing is in the morning. And I firmly believe it makes the whole day a lot better, no matter what happens. It just makes the day a lot better. Now, on your tablet, can you split the screen?
Yes, I can. I don't ever do it,
Oh, okay. All
but
right.
I can.
I use an iPad and I split it and I have my I use an Apple Pencil. And I like to write notes, and my audience knows that because it slows me down and I can think a lot better. But on one side of the screen, I'm writing, and the other side, I've got the scriptures. And then if I want, I can take my handwriting, convert it to text, and throw it into the scriptures if I want to. But it was that. Now, do you use a hard copy of the scriptures at all next to them?
I do not. No, I
Okay.
have a hard copy here that I use sometimes when I teach the kids. I am an exclusively tablet studier nowadays.
Okay. All right. And what you do on your tablet transfers over to your Android, of course, your Android phone.
Yeah,
Now,
because
yeah,
everything's all synchronized. That's the
yeah,
beauty of
okay.
it.
And for those people that don't want to use tablets or a phone, it's also an app on your MacBook or on your PC.
Or just write in your web browser. You sign in on your church
Yep.
account and you will
Yep. You
have all
go
your
in the web browser
annotations.
and you've got, thank you for bringing that up. Absolutely. Now, that doesn't quite have all the bells and whistles that the mobile does, but it's still pretty good. And I know a lot of people that that's what they use.
It's got about 90% of them.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yes, absolutely. Well, so
It was at
do
first unusable to me because I always use dark mode when I'm studying on my tablet. But
oh,
then
okay.
originally the church did not have a dark mode version of the Gospel Library Online. And so all of my yellow underlined highlights were effectively invisible. I was really
Well,
grateful when they added dark mode online.
well, you're a coder. You should have just gone in and broke in and changed it.
So I did actually, no, I didn't break in. I did install a browser extension that allowed me to customize dark mode.
Oh, okay.
I
There,
think it's
there we
called Dark
go.
Read or something. But then it interfered with
Okay.
my highlights. Yeah.
Okay. Now, how many children do you have?
I have four,
You have four. And what are the ages?
8 and under.
Okay. When do you find time to study the scriptures in the morning?
I do not find time to study them in the morning. I could if I made that a priority, but I actually find that for me at least, revelation flows better at night when I have put the cares of the day aside.
Okay.
And with that, the prophets counsel you to study for at least a certain amount of time. I like my scripture study time to be more open-ended.
Hmm.
And so studying in the evening means that I don't have a hard and fast time that I need to wrap things up and do things like earn a living, annoying things like
Hmm.
that.
Well, you got to put shoes on the kids' feet.
Yes.
So, okay. So you do it in the evening. Very good. Yeah, I've had a lot of people, they get up early, some do it late in the evening. The key thing is to do it every day. That
hmm
is what's actually very important. Um, and you mentioned a time frame. I've done a lot of research. I haven't found anything. Well, I found two sources about how long to study the scriptures, but nothing definite. Some things have been alluded to. I think it was President Benson that was quoting another prophet that said that he thought a half hour was a good thing. But then I found another one from one of the prophets said an hour would really be good, but if you can't, 45 minutes is good. And if you can't, a half hour is good. And if you can't, you'd be surprised what you can do in 15 minutes.
hmm
So I don't think we should be feel any guilt of the time we spend. It's the dedication and our attitude as we study.
I like to talk about how there are 3 degrees of scriptural study. Just like there's 3 degrees of heaven, right? There's a telestial, there's a
Okay.
terrestrial,
Yes. Yeah.
and there's a celestial. And I always say you start with what you can. Most people in the church, most active, believing, participating, calling, holding, temple recommend carrying members of the church do not really do anything in the scriptures from a day to day. It's because
Yes.
it's not a habit. And many times we feel so overwhelmed by the idea of perfection and what the ideal looks like that we're afraid to make any progress. Or we'll try and say, okay, here's the deal. I am going to be super righteous, Mr. Macho Man, and I'm going to set a goal. I'm going to study 1 hour every day. I'm going to read 14 chapters a day, and that will get me to the end of the Book of Mormon before the end of the Come Follow Me year. And we set these lofty goals, and then we get burned out really fast and we stop. Or at least that's my tendency.
Yeah.
And so I like to say the telestial level is just do what you can. I talked with this lady on my mission. Her name was Judy, and she was absolutely hilarious. She was such a sweet lady. Loved talking with her. She was funny. She would never do anything. And I mean anything that the missionaries asked her to do. We left her a single verse 1 week. Will you please just read this one verse before we come back next week? I'll see elders. Come back the next week. Hey, Judy, it's time for your lesson. So, what'd you think of that verse? Oh, I didn't get time to read it. It was 26 words. I feel like you maybe could have read it. She says, no, you don't understand how busy I am, elders. I am so busy all the time. I'm just constantly go, 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 go. I'm under this tremendous stress and mental load and all this stuff. And at the time we came in, the TV was on. It was a little distracting. And so, as missionaries, of course, you ask for the TV to turn off so the Spirit could be present. But before I did, the Spirit said, Ella Watkins, ask her about her TV show. I'm like, I don't care about her TV show. I said, no, go ahead and ask her. And so I said, Judy, what is the show? And she's, oh, this is my favorite show of all time. I won't miss an episode. In fact, when they play the reruns, I watch both the reruns because it is so good. I said, oh, that's interesting to know. We're gonna have a prayer, and I think I know what we're going to talk about. And so we said, you managed to carve out time for reruns of a TV show. Do you think maybe you could try and carve out some time for the scriptures and prioritization? We tried to approach it nicely, right, as softly as possible. And she did get the picture. She says, "Oh, you're right. This isn't a question of me not having time. This is a question of me not making time."
Right. That's
And
what
we
it comes
gave her a
down
challenge. We
to.
said, "I'm going to go out in your front yard. I'm going to get a rock, nice big old rock, and I want you to go put this on your bed. And when you go to bed at night, there's going to be a rock there, and that rock is going to remind you to go read one verse of scriptures for 10 seconds." And it'll bring it to your mind. You cannot take this rock off your bed until you have done that. And then when you wake up in the morning, have the rock on your shoes. And then when you go to get your shoes, like, there's a rock on my shoes. That's really interesting. Oh, yes, I'm supposed to put that in my bed. So every day you are guaranteed before you go to bed that you're going to do this. He said, or if you would prefer, here's a post-it note you can put on your bathroom mirror. It says, before you whiten your teeth, because you're not going to forget to brush your teeth, before you whiten your teeth, whiten your spirit, pointing down to the Book of Mormon right there next to the sink. Just little things like that to get you into the habit.
Yes.
Now, what I found when I was developing my scripture study habit is once you get to a certain point where it's a habit, the Spirit will not let you sleep if you haven't done it.
Yeah.
You don't need an app to keep track of it anymore. You don't need
Right.
reminders because you will lay there and you'll be thinking, why am I unable to sleep? Why do I have insomnia all of a sudden? And then Spirit will say, it's because you haven't read your scriptures. Ah, that's the
Yes.
missing piece. Okay,
Yes.
I will go and do that. Once you establish that, then the question is just about improving that habit that you've already developed. And then the
Yes.
terrestrial level, this is what we've often seen when we were youth, when our parents are trying to teach us. And that's where they say, we're going to read a chapter a day. Sometimes it's a short chapter, sometimes it's a long chapter. We're going to sit and we're just going to read it. We're going to plow through it. This is one where you're taking it to the next level and starting to dedicate some serious time to it, but you're still not studying.
Right.
We are not commanded just to read the scriptures, but to study the scriptures. So at the terrestrial level, reading a chapter a day, it's a fixed number of pages or something, that's good. But there's something even better that I call the celestial level of scripture study, and that is to stop reading and start studying. And there's this great quote from President Howard W. Hunter I want to share. He said, there are some who read a schedule of a number of pages or a set number of chapters each day or week. This may be perfectly justifiable and may be enjoyable if one is reading for pleasure. Pause. I don't know who he's hanging out with where scripture said he's like, oh, this is a pleasure. But for most members of the church, I think I could speak for us and say, that's not what we like to do in our free time. He says, if you're reading for pleasure, go ahead and just read a certain number of pages and chapters. He says, but it does not constitute a meaningful study. It is better to have a set amount of time to give scriptural study each day than to have a set amount of chapters to read. Sometimes we find that the study of a single verse will
Yes.
occupy the whole time.
That is a great quote. I have it, and I often refer to it when I'm giving devotionals, and sometimes even in priesthood to remind people that listening, one person, some person I asked, I won't mention names or who it was, male or female. But anyway, I asked, I said, do you study the
I mean,
scriptures?
you said it was
And
in
just,
priesthood, so that narrows it down a little, right?
well, no, this was outside of priesthood. It was a
Okay.
different situation. But anyway, the person said, yeah, I don't have a lot of time, but I listen to the scriptures while I'm in the car. Now, is that a bad thing? No, it's not a bad thing. Usually when I'm in the car, I listen to conference talks or I listen to scriptures, but that is not studying the scriptures based upon that, what you just said from President Benson.
I
And
tried that
I,
in the car listening approach for the Old Testament, and I almost got in several accidents because of it. So
oh,
I
really?
would
Because
actually,
you really got involved in the story.
oh, you get in the book of Numbers? Oh my goodness. Like, and so of the tribe of so and so offered these 17 things I'm going to list in order. And instead of just saying, and the other 11 guys offered the exact same thing, no, I'm going to repeat every single
Yes,
one
yeah.
and their genealogy. Oh my goodness. Yeah. No,
Yeah,
that I
yeah,
could not get through Numbers in the car, man.
yeah. Well, you're voicing, I happen to know that less than 30% of the members of the church study the scriptures daily. Study. We're talking about real study. And it's a shame because this is, um, Elder Bednar said that the study of the scriptures is a prerequisite to receiving personal revelation.
100%.
Now, you mentioned three things. I had Brad Wilcox on this podcast, and he introduced three ways to study this. He said there's three ways to study the scriptures. And he said, first of all, you study the line. So you're just reading. Second, you study between the lines. Like, what does that word actually mean? And the third one is you read beyond the line. How does it apply to me? And so I've always thought that is just great advice coming from him on that. So, all right. Well, I think
Your
we're,
point about
go
one
ahead.
more, your point about personal revelation is extremely key. I struggled for much of my life with the question of how does the Spirit speak to me? Because I come to find out he speaks to everyone a little bit differently. In
Yes.
Doctrine and Covenants, he says he will speak to our mind and our heart. That doesn't mean that it's a 50-50 ratio. To my
Yes.
mom, he speaks very much to the heart and very little to the mind. She acts very much on intuition and emotion. That's how the Spirit speaks to
Hmm.
her. She finds herself impressed emotionally to do things that don't seem rational at the time, but prove to be prophetic.
Yep.
On the other hand, I'm the exact opposite. I rarely feel the Spirit in the sense of warm tinglies. My experience with the Spirit more often is the way Prophet Joseph Smith described of pure intelligence flowing down, ideas that I can tell are not my own.
Hmm.
And for me, at least, the language of the Spirit is the language of the Scriptures. When Jesus told his apostles, "I will send you the Comforter, and he will bring all things to your remembrance." For me, that means that when I pray, and in the occasions I can have an actual two-way conversation with God, his answers are almost exclusively quotes of verses I had read, bringing them to my remembrance. Verses that I would have never thought to apply to the questions I was asking.
Hmm.
And I realized if I had not spent time in the scriptures becoming familiar with the words, then I was limiting the vocabulary that the Spirit could use to communicate with me.
Yes. Very good point. Marvelous point. Amen to that. I'm like you. I spent most of my life, what is revelation and how do I receive it? And I actually hear words, but I know I've learned it's a special tone that's totally different than my own thoughts. And and so the other thing I do, and I was going to ask you, as you're studying the scriptures, do you write in a journal things that are
I
revealed to you?
Yes, so I have my personal journal, which is mainly just a spiritual journal. Each of my journal entries, like, so here's what's happening in my life, and then here are the insights.
Okay,
Um,
yeah.
so I
And
guess I'm mixing
is
big plates and small
that
plates.
digital or written? Is that paper and pen
Digital.
or is it digital?
No,
Okay, all right.
it's digital. It's all in Google Docs.
Yeah.
And then as I'm studying, when I have impressions about the text, I take those right in line with my notes. And the big thing that I find the Spirit really comes to me is the linking. Is I will read a phrase and I say, well, that sounds like that talk from Elder Uchtdorf, that story that he gave. Okay, link
Hmm.
that. And and it sounds like this other thing that Elder Holland said, and it sounds like this other thing that Nephi said that sometimes it's also the footnote and sometimes it's
Yes.
not. And I'm wondering, okay, why didn't Bruce R. McConkie make that footnote? This is an obvious connection. It's amazing. Little phrases and stuff like that. So that's my study. And then as I come back and read, and I hope this doesn't come across the wrong way. I'm blown away by what I used to know.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
read that and I say, wait, why is this underlined? this verse seems completely innocuous. This verse seems completely unimportant. And then I click on my notes and see what it's like. Say, oh, I figured that
Yes.
out. No, it
Yeah.
wasn't me. But it was definitely guided, and it's a
No.
huge resource for me personally.
Yes. I I think it was today I tapped on a note and I read it and I go, wow, that's brilliant. And I go, that's not me. I can tell when it's not me because it's not my language. There
Hmm.
are words that are used that are just not in my language. And of course, other times I tie into a note something that one of the prophets said, not necessarily in general conference, might have been in a book or something. And I copy and paste that into a note. And I try my best to remember to put the reference in case somebody should ask. Uh, but I've got some information. I go, wow, I forgot that I learned that 2 years ago because this is what President Bednar said, and it answered my question. That's why it's so important to keep a journal and so important to make notes, and that's why in this digital age, to be able to attach notes to verses to me is a true blessing. It really is a blessing. And it used to be, it was limited to 22 character or 22,000 characters. It's now,
Okay, so I'm a verbose note taker. I am not that level, man.
Well, I
22,000.
was curious because one of our developers, I asked him what was the limit, and he said, oh, 22,000 characters. And so I thought, okay, the average conference talk is how many characters? So I actually took a conference talk, dumped it in, had it count the characters, and it's usually about 16 to 17,000 characters a conference talk. So you can put that in. But about 2 years ago, I was at BYU for BYU Education Week. We had a booth there, and one of the developers came by, and I said, it appears that this limit has changed. And I said, what is it now? He says, we don't know. We just opened it up and we have no idea how many characters you can put in there. So I think one could write A Tale of Two Cities and there's notes if they wanted to go off on the tangent that way.
What that tells me is they're making some interesting creative storage space in Cassandra S3, but that's maybe too technical here.
No, I understand what you're saying because I wonder about speaking of storage space. I don't know how many people have approached me and said, why can't we put photos into the gospel library? And I used to think, why do you want to put photos of your cat into the gospel library? That's what I was thinking. And then I had the experience that I was at a church historical site that I took some pictures and I go, well, I wish I could have those pictures in my gospel library. So anyway, what I do is I link them in and that's
Hmm.
how I do it. But I tell people you need to understand that photos take up a lot of space and there are these things called servers and the church has to pay for these servers.
Yeah, we
And
don't want to build a new Google Drive. Yeah.
And so, and I know what servers the church is using. I won't mention. They're probably using the same servers for family search. But anyway, it all costs money. And I don't think people understand how much money the church is investing in technology. It's a, I actually saw the budget and I was blown away. Just on my part, the gospel library, forget family search and everything else. I was just blown away by the amount of money that's being spent. And I tell people the brethren want us to use these devices. There's a reason. And all the technology ever given to us is to hasten the Lord's work. So, well, Matthew, it's getting late and you still need to study the scriptures. So we need to get off here so that you can do that. You've made inferior peanut butter sandwiches for your children. I hope they don't notice that
Rub
in
it
the
in,
morning.
rub it in.
Oh, by the way, do you add anything to the peanut butter and jelly sandwiches? Do they get chips or is it vegetables or what?
Oh yeah, they've got sides. And we went to Aldi, so we've got some stuff we can send to them.
No, okay. All right. Hopefully it's not just carrot sticks.
No, they won't eat those. They'll just throw those away.
All right, Matthew, as always, I always appreciate the time I have with you because I actually learn from you. You may not believe this, but I do learn from you, and
Well, likewise.
I'm always appreciative of your insight and everything. So I just really want to thank you again for being on, and especially so late at night for you. And as always on my podcast, I ask my guests if they'll share their testimony.
Yep. So My testimony of the church is not an Alma the Younger experience where it came in a flash of light. Actually, it is an Alma the Younger experience, and here's why. In Alma 5, when he is teaching the people of Zarahemla, he asks, how do you suppose that I know these things? Now, as an audience member, I might be tempted to say, well, you did see an angel, and your dad is the prophet. So maybe that. That's not what he pulls back on, though. He says, I know these things because I have fasted and prayed many days. And when I first read that, it struck me. The Spirit was saying, there are no shortcuts to a testimony of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Even these exceptional cases we like to think about that make the headlines and make it into the scriptures, they do not shortcut the way that testimonies are received, which is line upon line, precept upon precept, through fasting, study, and prayer. Laman and Lemuel saw angels too. It didn't help them squat because they did not have the faith and the work and the diligence and the small things to back up the sure witness that they had received. Joseph Fielding Smith, if you read in the chapter on the Holy Ghost, I think it's chapter 8 in the Gospel Principles Manual, he says, any manifestation of an angel or even of the Son of God himself, literally you can see Jesus and it will impress the eye and then fade with time. It's the impressions of the Holy Ghost that make the change. I'm converted to the gospel because it makes sense, because it feels right, because all the questions that I have, I don't have answers for them, but I have space for those answers through study and prayer. And because the gospel gives me purpose and light into my life, people often say, oh, it's wrong for you to say you know, because does anyone really know anything? Who has a perfect witness? You shouldn't say you know the church is true unless you have a perfect witness. To which I'd say, okay, that's fine. But why don't you say, I believe? Fine. I believe to the extent that I will stake my life and my family's life and my livelihood and everything I have on this. If you say that's not knowledge, fine, you define it how you want, but it's strong enough that I can rely on it for everything I need in life.